Hey guys, thanks for watching. Well, that fateful day has finally arrived. It is 1 year later, January 6th, 2022. And what a year it's been since the insurrection at Capitol Hill. If there's any date that people would associate with me, it would definitely be January 6th at this point. In fact, get your naturalist capitalist merchandise at toplobster.com. Use promo code disappointment and you'll get 20% off until midnight tonight, January 6th. So go check that out. So first I want to talk about what led up to the riot on January 6th. So we got to go back to March and April of 2020. Coronavirus hits the United States, and so there were all sorts of lockdown measures taken that caused people to lose their jobs, be stuck in their houses, literally under house arrest in certain areas of the country. And so people started getting nervous and, unsure of their future. And so everyone was at a flashpoint. And the first time we really saw this was in April in Michigan at the State House. Hundreds of armed protesters went to the Michigan State Capitol and demanded that the economy be reopened. And it was funny because I saw left wingers jeering at the right wingers for doing this. They were saying that, oh, they were just doing this because they didn't have haircuts or they're upset they can't go to the bar. And there was one picture of a guy holding a sign saying I need a haircut or something, but that was not why the majority of them were upset. They had been placed under pretty authoritarian measures by Whitmer. She was a horrible governor and she was putting them through shit they didn't need to go through. She wasn't allowing people to buy like home repair products during the lockdown, so people couldn't even work on their own houses or do anything. It was ridiculous. And a lot of them had lost their jobs and were angry and frustrated and scared. So they went to the Capitol and demanded that the economy be reopened. Now, a couple weeks after this, George Floyd dies with Derek Chauvin kneeling on his neck and that whole scene that everyone saw. And that caused a bunch of left-wingers to lose their shit and start protesting. And a lot of them did some dumb stuff like, burning people's property, and that's completely unacceptable. But a lot of people were just protesting and they were upset because of what had happened. And I don't think that this was all about George Floyd or all about police brutality, but a lot of people were just frustrated about how things were going in this country, and they were out there in the streets complaining. So these were very similar events that only happened a couple weeks apart from each other, and you had both of these sides absolutely hating each other's guts instead of the government, where the government is the root of both of those problems. The government was locking you in your house and shutting down your economy, arresting you if you went to a place where you weren't supposed to be, and the government was also responsible for George Floyd's death. So another layer we have to add onto this, on top of the lockdowns and the economic strangleholds on the United States, is the stimulus bills that were introduced and passed. Two of them passed. They were the CARES Act and the COVID relief bill in December, right before Christmas. These were the two largest spending bills in human history, and they were enormous corporate handouts. The CARES Act was $2.7 trillion, and the COVID relief bill was $2.4 trillion. On top of these stimulus bills, the Fed was buying corporate bonds directly. They were buying municipal bonds. They were bailing out all sorts of corporate and state interests, while the people were getting table scraps. $600 was what was offered in the COVID relief bill in December. And it was a 5,500-page bill full of ridiculous giveaways to foreign countries, to the military, to corporations, while people got almost nothing. And it was only introduced for like 10 hours, and almost everybody in Congress voted for it. There were very few dissenters, and a lot of people saw this in both bills. They saw that they weren't getting anything, that most of it was going to special interests, to the military, to corporations, and that made people very desperate. So obviously in 2020, we had the election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I actually thought Joe Biden and Donald Trump were two of the most similar candidates I'd ever seen in my life. Donald Trump of 2020 was not Donald Trump of 2016, and he couldn't be because he hadn't been the president he ran on being in 2016. Instead of draining the swamp, he appointed the swamp. Instead of ending the wars, he brought drone bombings to an all-time high. Instead of taking on the Fed, he threatened to fire Powell if he didn't bring interest rates up high early enough. He was just terrible. Like, there was nothing good about him. And instead of being able to call Joe Biden the establishment and deep-rooted corruption that had been in Washington for decades like he could to Hillary Clinton, since he couldn't really do that because he was president and hadn't really fixed anything and the country was falling apart anyway, he decided to go down the route of calling Joe Biden and Kamala Harris the Black Panthers or radical socialists or communists, and it just didn't land. And in my opinion, Donald Trump actually did lose that election. But whether or not I am correct about that, many people believed that the election was illegitimate. And the election lasted several days. States went from blue to red to blue, and it was a disaster. There were multiple court cases that all got thrown out, and we went into 2021 with millions of people believing that the election was illegitimate. Which, even though I disagree, I don't think you can really blame people for, not believing that. Especially after what the Democrats did to Donald Trump throughout his first term. With Russiagate and trying to impeach him over the Ukraine phone call and trying to say the 2016 election was illegitimate, that Russia had thrown it. Why do you expect them to just roll over and say, okay, yeah, Joe Biden is our president now? And so on January 6th, Congress met to confirm the election for Joe Biden. So, leading up to January 6th, when it comes to the security apparatus surrounding the Capitol, whether it's the Capitol Police or the National Guard or whatever, you know that there are going to be thousands upon thousands of Trump supporters in Washington, D.C. You know that they're going to vote to confirm Joe Biden. So why do you not have like robust security around the Capitol on January 6th? It was just pretty standard Capitol Police. The next day and following months, they had Washington, D.C. under lockdown with troops and gates and fences and the whole nine yards. Why was none of this done on January 6th? Or even better, like the night before on January 5th?
Yes, it is clear that the establishment and the ruling class and the mass media wanted all of this to occur in order to sell the quote unquote horrific imagery to the people the next day. I mean, here we are 24 hours later, more like 32 hours later, and it's still all anybody is talking about. So, Reed, earlier you said that this was definitely, I can't remember what word you used specifically, but I think you said it was encouraged or permitted to happen. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, so the word I used is I imagine it was enabled.
Yes.
So that doesn't mean it was planned by the government necessarily, but it's kind of like my view on 9/11. You hear people say 9/11 was an inside job, and they picture that the terrorists were government agents somehow, and that we, rigged the buildings to fall. I don't think any of that. And with 9/11, it's kind of, I imagine we had foreknowledge of it, and we could have put a stop to it, and we didn't, and we might have made it easy for it to happen because we wanted an excuse for something. That's kind of how I look at this. I think that we knew that, I think that they knew something was going to happen. First of all, they knew that, tens of thousands of people were going to be in Washington, D.C., and they also knew that Congress was going to confirm Biden. I mean, anyone who thinks that that wasn't going to happen is not being honest with themselves. So if you know tens of thousands of people who are there to protest what is going to happen are going to be there, and you're going to have lawmakers in the Capitol building, why would you not already have the National Guard there? And I've heard that there were purposeful wrenches thrown in the cogs to keep the National Guard from being there. And then I've seen videos of them basically letting the rioters pass the line of cops, opening up the barriers. And then, we've seen the government's complete lack of remorse for murdering people for no reason. But then here you've got them literally storming a federal building full of lawmakers, and now they're showing a lot of restraint. I mean, it just doesn't add up to me. So I don't pretend to know what happened, but I think if I had to guess, there were probably some agitators placed there, just like I think there were in a lot of the protests last summer. And I think certain actions were encouraged. And if they weren't encouraged, they were at least permitted.
And then they take that and they hype that up to, you know, make what was essentially, don't get me wrong, there was some violence, but it felt a lot like a Dave Matthews Band concert up at the Capitol. I was there. I was on the second level.
We're in complete agreement on this issue. So.
Well, I mean, into this, you know, this idea that it was some kind of violent insurrection. I can promise everybody that if it was a violent insurrection, I would have not been there with my camera filming. I would have had my fucking heads up. I might not even been in the situation, right? I'm pretty self-aware guy. And when I feel a real situation of danger, I leave, right? I leave. I get out of that situation. I never felt that there. You know, the one moment where, and you can hear it in my voice, that I'm like kind of worried is up on the second level, and they were going through like the middle, and there was like a barrage of cops there, and they were fighting people, right? And you've seen some of those videos. It's the guys that are trying to dive into the hole and kick at the cops. All of a sudden, a sledgehammer comes out of nowhere, Reed, and it starts getting passed up towards that thing. And I'm literally, and it's a long one, you know, it's not like it's a sledgehammer. Mm-hmm. And I go, you can hear me on the video. I go, Jesus Christ. I go, you'll kill somebody with that. I'm like, no, you know, and you see it go up forward, and then you see somebody see, hey, this is a sledgehammer. This is going to kill somebody. They grab it, and then they hand it to the police officer. You know what I mean? Who was passing up a sledgehammer and why? You know, that's my bigger question when I'm in that environment. Right. I see that, right?
We need to go, I'll say it. All right. We need to go in to the Capitol. Let's go! I'm going to put it out there. I'm probably going to go to jail for it, okay? Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol. Into the Capitol. No! Peacefully. Fed. Peacefully. Okay, folks, grab the word. As soon as the president's done speaking, we go to the Capitol. The Capitol's this direction. Done speaking. We are going to the Capitol, where our problems are. It's that direction. Please spread the word.
So it seems to me that there was certainly some government instigation at work on January 6th. The man in that last video clip I showed has not been arrested, has not been indicted, has not been imprisoned. Very, very suspect at the very least. I mean, if you're going to go without any speculation, but it's not much of a break to speculate that that was Fed involvement. And then what Jason Burmis was telling me about with the sledgehammer, that could have been organic, but probably not. You know, you got to realize a lot of these people that were there had no intention of being violent. They just went there because they were angry. A lot of them weren't even necessarily just angry about the election. I have a friend who I talked to who was super angry at Trump because he had ended up signing that stimulus bill, and he still went to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Just to be there and see what was going on, and just because he was upset about the state of our country over the last year of lockdowns and everything that we've been through, and he just went there to be there in the moment and see what was happening. That is what I believe most people were there doing. And I think that there were some very carefully placed agitators who ended up exciting some people to go through the barricade and end up, you know, storming the Capitol building. I also find it abhorrent that people who just went into the Capitol building have been imprisoned and that Donald Trump is not speaking up for them. He was supposed to do an event coming up here soon and he canceled it. If you are a Trump supporter and you stormed the Capitol because you were angry about the election and then he doesn't do anything for you, that is the saddest shit ever. And if you still believe in Trump after that, I don't know what to tell you. But well, I want to kind of wrap up with my general thoughts on January 6th. So I make a lot of jokes about it and I sarcastically overplay it all the time, and that's mostly in response to how the media has treated it. They have treated this like it was an insurrection, like it was an attempted coup. And that's just ridiculous. We're the most armed country in the world. We have like 500 million guns, and almost no one was armed. There were a few handguns. There were no long rifles that I've seen. This is the worst planned insurrection, if that's what it really was, which it obviously wasn't. But I want to, I do like the fact that you saw pictures of lawmakers cowering on the ground. And here's why. Because these lawmakers passed these bills that I brought up that sent billions of dollars to people who don't need them. They sent them to their special interest partners, to foreign countries. And they got paid by our tax dollars. So it made me feel good to see them cowering on the ground and remember who they're supposed to be representing. On top of that, just the optics of a federal building being attacked, instead of an Arby's being burned down like they were during the protests over the Black Lives Matter stuff in the summer. I think that's, at least the right-wingers were going after the right target. If you are upset about the election being confirmed, if you go to the Capitol building, at least you're going after the right target, in my opinion, instead of burning down the local tire shop. For example, when the Black Lives Matter protesters actually did burn down the police station, I thought, okay, you went after the power structure. You went after the target that was, responsible for your outrage and responsible for brutality against civilians. So, okay, I can understand that. But, when you're trying to burn down mom and pop's tire shop, it doesn't do anything to protect Black lives or end police brutality. Or at least with these guys on January 6th, they were going after the right building. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to say, every aspect of January 6th that the media or the government hates are the ones that I like. I like the aspect of scaring politicians who are supposed to serve you. I like the aspect of taking on the power structure. And I also like the fact that people have finally had enough and we're trying to do something about it. For me, Trump being president is not something that I would storm a federal building over. There are plenty of other things, including the stimulus bills that I pointed out, that I think are much more righteous reasons to want to take on the government like that.
And ultimately, this is why I say January 6th was a disappointment. The Fed involvement aside, even if this had been completely organic, we're meant to think that it was some sort of uprising, some sort of coup, some sort of fantastic insurrection, but it wasn't. It was a fart in the wind. It was a joke. If Ashley Babbitt hadn't been murdered by the cops, then it would have been funny, actually. But unfortunately, this was just another excuse for more authoritarian legislation that luckily still hasn't been passed, and also a demonization of gun ownership and people who are skeptical of the government.
It's so much more difficult today because of what we have seen, not just over the last 2 weeks, but that certainly has riveted our attention, but because of this growth in polarization in the United States and domestic violence in white supremacist groups. So I know looking forward that the members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of the country and they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians. And unfortunately, I think there has been this momentum that has been generated as a result of, unfortunately, the demagogic rhetoric of people that just departed government, but also those who continue in the halls of Congress. And so I really do think that the law enforcement, Homeland Security, intelligence, and even the defense officials are doing everything possible to root out what seems to be a very, very serious and insidious threat to our democracy and our republic.
But the other sad thing is that this became an incredibly partisan issue over a president who had broken almost all of his promises. Election integrity is a real issue, just like lockdowns, just like police brutality, and all of these issues have become partisan instead of people uniting against the state to rectify them.
But ultimately, even though I do think it's long past justification, I don't actually think that storming a federal building is going to get you anywhere. I think it's just going to backfire. I think they'll always use force to destroy you. I think the best way to fight this is be more involved in your community, pay more attention to your state and local governments than the federal government. DeSantis proved that being a governor is much more powerful than being a senator. A senator can't do much to change federal policy, but if you're a good governor, you can protect your citizens against authoritarianism. And I've got my own problems with DeSantis, but he has proven that on the COVID front. Move to New Hampshire, move to Utah, move to Texas, move to Florida, move somewhere where people actually reflect your values, move somewhere where liberty is valued. And I think that's the best you can do to fight this beast. If you want to stay in New York or stay in Illinois, I wish you the best of luck, but I don't think you're going to win the minds of people on the battlefield of logic. And then if you ever end up storming a federal building, I think you are destined to lose. But those are my thoughts. Leave what you think in the comments. Happy January 6th. We'll see what happens over this next year.